Hello and welcome to a new video about microservices and containers. In the previous video, we talked about, as a developer, how can I use Docker to build a container image for my application, build it with a specific version, and push it to a Docker registry, and in this case, it was Docker Hub. In this episode, we will focus on the DevOps lifecycle and how a DevOps engineer or a system admin would set up an automated CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment, so that from the moment a developer commits a new change to code, this change gets automatically built inside a container, create a version or a tagged image, push it to a Docker registry, and then automatically deploy this new image to a running instance of a container. In this video, we will take .NET as our code language. We will commit and push to Azure DevOps, and we will use Azure DevOps to create continuous integration builds and continuous deployment release management. We will use the build and release from Azure DevOps to push or to deploy our changes to Azure Cloud. We're using these tools as a sample, but of course you can do the same workflow on different programming language and a different CI/CD tool and a different cloud. So let's start. I'll start by creating a new project in Visual Studio. I'll choose a ASP.NET Core Web Application. I'll call it Web Application 3, and I'll create. I will choose HTTPS, enable Docker support, Linux, and enable Open API support for Swagger. I'll click Create. I'm using .NET Core 5 for this. This is the project that was created by Visual Studio automatically. Because I chose Docker support, it created this Docker file. If we open this Docker file, you will see the steps Visual Studio puts in order for us to build our application. If you need more explained version of this, how to create this Docker file manually and what does it means, check the previous video. For now, we will run our application. I'll click Run using Docker. And as you can see, it will start to build this Docker file. Just want to make sure that it runs correctly. And as you can see, it opens the Swagger interface on localhost with one weather forecast controller. What I'll do next is to push my source control to Azure DevOps. I created a new project on Azure DevOps called Web Application 3. And as you can see, it has a source control repo that is now empty. I'll push my code first to that repo. Once this is done, I can go and refresh my page. And here you see my code is up there. Now the next step is to create a continuous integration build. I'll go to pipelines. I'll create my first pipeline. I'll choose here, use Azure repos, get, choose my repo. And I'll choose here, build a Docker image. As you can see here, it detects automatically the location of the Docker file that I have inside my source code. And I'll validate that and configure. And this is the suggested YAML file, Azure pipelines.yaml, that will be created and put inside my source control. In here, it says use, the trigger would be the master branch. Any code change to master will trigger this build. It has a variable named tag, and the tag is using the build ID, the build number. We'll see that in a minute. And if we skip that stage and job parts, it is using a Ubuntu latest virtual machine image, and it's using one task, which is Docker task that builds an image. The command is build the Docker file. This is the location of my Docker file, and the tag that it will use is the tag variable, which is the build number. So in this case, every time we run our build, it will create an image. It will do nothing of this image right now, where we will not use this image according to this pipeline, but let's save and run it, just make sure that it will build successfully. This will commit this file to my code. And it started one pipeline. If I opened it, it will start immediately. Let's watch it. This is the steps where it's building the Docker file. As you can see, the build finished successfully. It created an image. We didn't use it yet. Okay, the next step would be to push this image into Docker Hub. I'll go to Docker Hub. I have an account there. This is my account, and this is an image that I previously pushed. It's called ASP.NET App, and it has one tag, which is latest. What we need to do is to add a step to this build that pushes the image that we're creating, tag it by the name of the build, by the number of the build, and push it to this Docker Hub registry. How we will do that, I will use this article. It says how to use the Docker task to build and push. The first thing is to add a step called login and log into the container registry. In order to create this connection between Azure DevOps and the Docker Hub, I'll go to project settings. I'll go to service connections. I'll create a new service connection. I'll choose the type is Docker registry. I'll choose here the type of the Docker registry is Docker Hub. I put here, I saved already my username and password for Docker. I click verify, it succeeds, and I'll give it a name, my Docker Hub. And we'll grant access permission to all pipelines. Then let's get back to our pipeline. I'll edit this pipeline, and I will add this task. This one, it uses Docker Hub. I'll add this step before the other one. I need to log in before I can build and push. So here I added this step. It says login to Docker Hub. The command is login, and the container registry, I need to specify the connection name. I'll call it my Docker Hub, as I called it there. And then I need to change this command instead of build. I needed to build and push. So as you can see here, I'll change the display name to build and push. I'll change the command to build and push. And I'll add this line that says what would be the repository that I will be using. It would be mly/ASP.NET app. This is the name of the repository. Now let's save our pipeline file. As soon as I save, I committed this file to the source control, so it will automatically start another instance of this pipeline. Let's go into this instance and see it running. Now, once the build completes, let's go to Docker Hub. I'll refresh this page. And as you can see, there's a version here that is added 61. If I go back, I'll see this is the build ID I see here in the URL. This is build ID 61. So now, every time I push a new code, a new pipeline will be executed, and that pipeline will push a new version of the image to Docker Hub. The next step is to go to Azure portal now and create an app service that runs this container, a container that uses this image. Let's go to portal.azure.com. I'll create a new resource of type container web app for containers. That's a preview feature. I'll choose from here the resource group to be web application 3. And I'll choose the app name to be web application 3. Showing them 3. And it will publish a Docker container on a Linux operating system on this region. And I'll choose the basic size. I'll click next. It will ask me for continuous deployment. I will not choose this because I want to demo Azure DevOps integration. From the Docker side, I will choose it's a single container that uses Docker Hub. And here is the name of the image app with the tag 61. And the startup command would be .NET web application 3.0. No application size for now. As you can see, deployment is in progress. Once this deployment is completed, we will take a look at our application running. Deployment is complete. Let's go to resource. This is the name of our app service. And this is the URL of our app service. Let's click this URL. And here is our application running. This is the Swagger page that shows our application. The next step would be to create an automatic. Now we deployed our application, but we did that manually the first time on Azure. Let's go to our pipeline and create a new pipeline that will automatically deploy this application every time we create a new version. So let's go to releases. So let's go create our release pipeline. Before we create our release pipeline, we need to set up the connection between Azure DevOps and my Azure subscription that I'm going to use for deployment. So I'll go to project settings. I'll go to service connection again, and I will create a new service connection, and I will use Azure Resource Manager. It will ask me for this is my subscription, and I will name this service connection. I'll name it my Azure. Once I added this, let's go back to the releases. Create a new release pipeline. And I'll tell it to deploy Azure App Service deployment. This is the type of the template that I want to use. It has one stage. Let's set up this stage first. It has one job, one task. And in this case, it will ask me which Azure subscription you want to use. I should see my Azure Service Connection that I created here. And from here, I can choose. When I choose web app only on Windows, it should be web app for containers, Linux. I see the different containers that I have. I just created Bishoy Demo 3. I'll choose that. And I will say here the registry or namespace would be docker.io. And the repository would be y/ASP.NET app. The startup command is .NET application 3. If I go to this one, you will see here that he will use by default the tag with the build ID. I'll leave this here. I'll go back to the pipeline and I'll add an artifact, which is basically when shall we trigger this release pipeline. I'll choose from the trigger types. I will choose Docker Hub. This is the service connection. This is my namespace. And this is my repository. This is saying to Azure that whenever a new tag is pushed to this repository on Docker Hub, create a new release. And here I would tell him enable continuous deployment, so it will automatically trigger this stage 1 deployment. I'll call this deploy to Azure, for example, and I'll click save. It is now saved. Let's try that one more time. If I go to this Swagger page that is on Azure, it has web application 3. Let's go to this part of code. I'll pull the latest version first. I'll go to the startup configuration and I will say the title would be web application version 2. This is V2 of my application. I'll push this change to commit and push to master. Now let's see how our workflow works automatically right now. Once I pushed, let's go to the pipelines. You will find an already running pipeline for this change. Here is version 2. It's already building and pushing my image. Let's check on Docker Hub that a new image is created. Here is the new image, 62. Now let's go to our releases. You will see an automatically created release is already queued. As you can see here, it's deploying this version of the application. Now the job is completed. Let's go to our web application. Let's refresh this page. And now we see version 2 is updated. With that, we reached the end of our demo. We looked at how to set up CI/CD pipeline using Azure DevOps and Azure. We looked at how to, from the moment we commit a new version of code, in a few minutes, it will automatically get built, pushed, and deployed to our Azure instance. Thanks you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and wait for next videos. Thank you very much.